consistently? How can we be effective at doing it? So the research goal from this came to be defining a common language or a taxonomic structure to describe business models that include the necessary and sufficient elements required for strongly sustainable, i.e. flourishing outcomes. In other words, let's put this into canvas language. We want to know what are the questions that you as a business model designer have to answer in order to have the possibility of having a flourishing business and creating the possibility of flourishing for all of your stakeholders. And you have to obviously answer the questions well. That's a whole different problem. So we're just asking at the moment, what are the questions you have to answer? How to answer them well? This is the next step in the research. But we have a problem from a scientific perspective, from a research epistemology perspective. How can we do this when there's no businesses out there that meet the definition of a flourishing business? Descriptive science, the normal way we do science, is we take a phenomena, we usually bring it into a lab to get rid of all the context so we can stop any variability in our experiment, and then we examine the thing through all kinds of techniques, whether they're sociological techniques, whether they're physical techniques or biological, etc. But in this case, we do not have any strongly sustainable, any flourishing businesses, so we can't try and study it. Does this mean science has nothing to do? If this normative goal is so important, are we saying that sustainability is, are we saying that science can not help humanity here? Surely there must be some way of doing it. So this is where design science comes in. And let me just spend a minute talking about what is design science. So let's just start with the top of this diagram to begin with. So what descriptive science does is it takes a phenomena in context. You observe something in the world, a star shining in the night sky, a person behaving on a street corner, doesn't matter, it's a phenomena. And this phenomena, you observe it, and this informs the creation or the discovery of theories, which then you try and prove are correct by a process of justification. And of course, this is the process of normal and paradigm-changing science that Kuhn so eloquently described in his work in the 1960s. But you'll notice there's a one-way arrow here. This can only be done if there's something to study. And we have a problem in this situation that the thing we want to create doesn't exist. So we can't theorize about it based on deductive and inductive techniques. But we have a lot of really useful work that's been done in this area that has created certain truths. People have been doing work on business models and sustainability for quite a long time now. So it's not that there's no knowledge out there. It's not that there's nothing. So there's quite a lot of truths that descriptive science has provided us. So what design science then says is we can build something new and we can then evaluate whether or not we have built something that is useful. So our justification in design science is not, is it true? It's whether it's useful. So I will use an analogy. Medicine is a design science. This was first put forward by Herbert Simon in The Sciences of the Artificial in 1969, along with management, architecture, engineering. These are all design disciplines in Simon's opinion. And they're design disciplines because if you think about the way that medicine has developed as a science, usually doctors had an idea about a treatment for a given condition without having any idea of why that treatment worked. And of course, in the history of medicine, we have a lot of experiences where, of course, doctors were wrong. Leeches, for example, to cure blood ailments, although it's turned out that certain things about leeches are good, in fact. But this is the process of design. I have an idea about something that is useful. I try it out and see if it is useful or not. If it is useful, guess what? We can create new phenomena more easily. And that means that there's more for descriptive science to study. So what I'm doing, what Osterwalder did and what I've done is built something, the ontology and the canvas that's powered by the ontology, and I evaluated it. Is it useful? And by bringing it into the world, of course, Osterwalder has now got amazing amounts of face value validity that what he created is useful. And since what we're doing is an extension of what Osterwalder has done, that also brings quite a lot of basic level of validity, usefulness to what we've done. We've obviously doing more and more specific stuff. So this is really the idea that we're doing design science, we're building and evaluating rather than discovering and justifying. Oh, one other thing about this. When you're doing something useful in the world, you don't care about disciplines. Because disciplines are, of course, the antithesis of practical reality. Practical reality is messy, everything is all together, you can't separate out things into nice buckets. Truths that come out of descriptive science tend to be discipline-based, of course, this is normal. And I'm not saying that disciplines are a bad thing at all, they're very, very helpful. But when you're coming to do something disciplinary, you have to look across the discipline. When you're doing something in design science, you have to look across the disciplines. And so, of course, for a problem like sustainability, which is inherently interdisciplinary, this is a very useful thing that we can do much more easily. So this is one of the reasons why this is such hard work, because you do have to try and look across the disciplines. And you end up with the normal problem of interdisciplinarity, which is you can go broad, but you can't go deep. So one of the critiques that would be really helpful is if we had some really deep scholars in some of the disciplines that I looked at, looking at what we've done here and saying, well, no, actually, you're wrong, or the way you've synthesized across the disciplines isn't appropriate for whatever reason. So this would be some further research. So again, this is a nice table and the citations are at the bottom here. Purpose of descriptive science is truth, describing and explaining the theory, whereas in design sciences, is it effective, is it useful? So the output of descriptive science is theory and the evidence to say that it's true, and the output of design science is artifacts and evidence that it's useful. So design science also has another interesting facet, which is not only can it create something useful in the face of incomplete knowledge, in doing so, it explicitly, not implicitly, explicitly includes the designer's values. So if you're thinking about designing a chair or a table, when the designer sketches it, what they're putting on paper is not only the knowledge about ergonomics, how the body works, how the body sits, which is a science that's been much descriptive science evidence to support what good ergonomics is. It's also the designer's idea of how will the chair be used, what is beautiful about a particular chair or color or fabric or material. So it includes the designer's values. So this is fantastically helpful in sustainability, where we know that what we choose to sustain is got to be values-based because it's a choice. So design science helps us in two ways. First, we can create when there's nothing. Secondly, we can create based on our values and be explicit about it. And that's okay. Whereas in descriptive science, of course, we're trying to keep values out of it. So this is what makes it useful, which I've just said. But we have some challenges with sustainability and design. Design isn't inherently systemic in how you do it. You know, a lot of designers will claim to be artists, which is the opposite of being systematic. So there are four things that we need to worry about as we're looking at business sustainability as the topic of the thing we want to design. The first is, how do we define the boundary of the problem and the solution? Because of this interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinary orientation, and because sustainability is a systemic idea, it's an emergent property of a complex system. How do we understand, what is the boundary, and then how do we understand what's in the boundary for the same reasons? What do we design? So what are we going to design? Are we designing a sustainable chair? We're designing a sustainable business model, but what does that mean? We actually have to get specific about what it is that we're designing. And how do we do it? How do we do design? We know how to design a chair or a car. How do we design a business, something to do with the business models? So we have a few slides here to talk about this. The first is, what was the literature that I looked at? So the literature, you call this the key theoretical frames in design work. What were these key theoretical frames that I chose? So it was a choice. Maybe I missed something. Maybe you think there's something in this list that is not relevant. But we started from the macro level. So if we're looking at strongly sustainable, we have to look at the physics of the world and the universe in which the world exists. Physics is obviously atoms, then we've got the molecules, then we've got the molecules that become life, and then the systems in which life exists, and that's all at the very big picture, the macro level. Then once we get into human activity, we have two disciplines, ecological economics specifically, which takes this systems-orientated view of economics. Neoclassical economics is not interesting if you're trying to talking about sustainable, and ecological sociology. So the sociologists have the same problem that the economists have, which is their discipline is also not system-based. In fact, the original definition of the discipline by Durkheim in the 1920s was sociology is the study of sociological facts. Entirely closed definition of the discipline. No context there at all. In about the same time that the ecological economists were getting going in the late 60s, early 70s, some sociologists went, you know, maybe there's some interaction going on between society and people in society and the world. And maybe we should pay attention to that. And so they created an even smaller subdiscipline of sociology, which is in fact called environmental sociology. But I don't like that term because environmental economics is still very neoclassical. So I like this term ecological, so hence it's in quotes. Then we have the meso level. So within society, so we've got the planet. Within society now we have organizations. And of course this is the place where business schools and schools of public administration have all of their disciplinary knowledge and all the truths that have come out of all of the fantastic research that have been done in business schools. So these can be broken out into these four areas that are relevant to business models. And then last but not least, organizations and society is composed of individuals. And because we're talking about sustainability and flourishing as the goal, that comes down to people. This is about positive psychology. This is about physiology. How can we flourish physically as people, as animals, not just. So we've got these three levels, micro, meso, and macro. And we also, in addition, have some formal science that we have to bring into this. We need some way to describe a flourishing business model. We need some formalism to help us with this. And of course, we're dealing with information. Information science is a formal scientific discipline. And so this is where the idea of ontologies and information science comes into this. Second thing is the research conceptual framework. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but yes, we've grounded this philosophically as you would expect in proper research. So we have three areas where you have to make decisions. What is your ontological approach, not an ontology, but ontology as the what exists question, the how do I know epistemology, and what's important, what's valuable, the axiology. So what we chose here was overall, I'm taking a critically pragmatic approach. Pragmatism as a philosophical school was first defined by Charles Sanders Peirce, an American, in the latter part of the 1800s, and was written up very nicely by, where's he gone? Oh, did I delete the actual name of the author of that? I did. I'm going to forget it as well. I'll have to fix that citation. And critical pragmatism, so pragmatism says, as a school, if it's important, it's valuable. Right? That's it. It's just purely pragmatic. So it doesn't say whether it's, it could be essentialist, objective, it could be anti-foundationalist, subjective, it doesn't matter. If it's useful, it's important. And so you get to choose what your ontology is, depending on what's valuable. And of course, from a design perspective, design is very practical. We're trying to create something useful, so that fits nicely. You also have a choice with pragmatics of whether you're idealist, empiricist, or a realist. I personally I was biased towards realism, but that doesn't mean other things don't come into it. And this becomes particularly important when you're talking about flourishing personally, because that's all to do with a subjective experience. So you can't just ignore the other worldviews here. And then from a valuable perspective, well, obviously you're doing design, so it's an applied piece of work. This is not a theoretical piece of work at all. This is an applied piece of work. So the research purpose was explore a problem to make a difference. So this is almost action research. You can think of design research as action research. So we want to design an ontology that can be usefully employed to describe a firm's current or future business model. So this is an important point here. Osterwalder's ontology isn't just for designing new ones. In fact, he didn't even think about the idea of using his ontology to design a new business. His original work to simply describe the way it is today. But you can describe something in its current state, or you can describe an imagined future state. So you can do both, but this is the future. And then to design and use a systemic epistemology to do this, to build an evaluation. So what do we design? So this is where we get into business models and ontology. So what is a business model? Lots of arguments in the literature about this. Most people use it without defining the term. It's an agreement that it is a model, so it's a representation of reality, which is, of course, something way more complicated in reality. It is just a model. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. The working definition is it's something to do with the logic of the business. So it's something to do about figuring out what are the right things to do, how you do them right, and how you know you're doing the right things right. And when used to express a desired future reality, a business model is inherently normative because the person describing the future, it had to be their values that drove it. And it's all about how you choose to answer what's right, how do you do it right, how do you know you've done it right. So I'll spend a moment talking about this in scientific research. In management research, using the business model as a unit of analysis is really pretty unusual. Still, we've talked about firms as a unit of analysis. We've talked about industries as units of analysis, or industrial sectors, or individuals from a leadership perspective, or teams within businesses. But business model is something new. The first PhD that used the business model was a German, Patrick Stahler, and who did his work in the just before Osterwalder. So this is actually another thing that inspired Osterwalder to do his work. And I won't go into this detail, but for those of you who want to get into the sort of academic background to why is a business model such a helpful concept, Rosen's anticipatory systems is a good piece of work to do. And one of our colleagues in our group, Peter Jones, Professor Peter Jones, is a real deep expert in this area. Lots of people are talking about it. It all really came out of the e-business stuff. There was almost no mentions of business model. The earliest one I found was 1954. Then there was another one or two in the late 50s and early 60s, but basically zero until the internet came along, and then all of a sudden everybody was talking about business models because everybody thought that the computer science people thought that the internet was going to change everything. I won't talk about how it's going to fit in for the moment. So we believe that given this normative goal that we have of flourishing, the business model is the most salient point to influence an entire enterprise, the people, its operations, and to endorse organizational values of flourishing and the processes required to create the possibility of flourishing. So that's the business model aspect of the artifact. So we're going to do something about business models. What's an ontology? It's an explicit specification of a conception. This is from artificial intelligence work. This is where the term was really defined originally. Ontology engineering is a subdiscipline within artificial intelligence. And to make it more human, it's simply a framework to enable communication between people by providing us a language, a vocabulary that we share. It's nothing really very special. In fact, it's a big word or a little word to mean a very simple idea. So the other thing about it is human language has the possibility to express conflicting ideas. We can use German or English and we can have a conversation, and I can have a different opinion to yours, and we can still have a conversation. We still have a shared language to have that conversation. I can understand that you disagree with me. Ontologies are exactly the same. This is fantastically useful when we know that all current businesses are really, or nearly all current businesses are really focused on profit maximization, and we know that focusing purely on profit maximization is in conflict with creating the possibility for flourishing. This is not a problem for ontologies. We can put a language together that can describe both possibilities in one ontology. This is really helpful when we want to describe both the current state of things and an imagined future state, where the difference between them is driven by a difference in worldview. So it gives us the framework to describe a business model whose goals, the objectives, the values of the people doing the describing, anywhere on a spectrum of we agree with Milton Friedman was 100% correct, to we have a goal to create the possibility of flourishing. So we can do that in one ontology. Lastly, methodological approach. We've already talked about this a little bit. So design science plus systems thinking. Systems thinking, for those of you not familiar with it, is the study of parts, which is what we know of is called analysis, plus the study of wholes. This is synthesis. This is what Herbert Simon in the Science of the Artificial